So I call to order the meeting of the Gladstone Planning Commission for Tuesday, August the 18th. We have several items on the agenda tonight. Our normal approval of meeting minutes, our report from our planner, and then we have two hearings. One is a continuation of a hearing regarding a zoning change in the downtown area, and the second is a land use hearing that also involves a change of zoning. Tammy, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Langston.
Present.
Commissioner Natalie Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Malachi.
Here.
Commissioner Poole. Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Smith.
Here.
Chair Milch.
Present. Let's join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the
of the
United
States of America
to the
and
republic
to the republic
which
which stands
One
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
Liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item of business is the approval of the minutes for our July 21, 2020 meeting. Have all the commissioners had an opportunity to review the minutes, and are there any additions or corrections to be made?
Yes, I have reviewed it. I didn't see anything that needed to be corrected.
Okay.
That's Commissioner Smith.
Thank you,
Mr.
Commissioner
Williams
Evans.
agree with that.
Commissioner Pat Smith agrees with that.
Okay. All right, I'm hearing a consensus here. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, Commissioner Langston made a motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Malachi seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. The second item on the agenda is the report from our planner, Joy Fields. Welcome. You'll need to, oh, there you go.
Thank you. I would like to take a moment and remind people that if you are not a planning commission member, there is going to be an opportunity for comments. But for those of you who are not speaking right now, it might be good for all of us to have our computers on mute to reduce background noise from the Zoom meeting, just for clarity of the recording. But with that, I will go on with the monthly planning report that was included in the City of Gladstone Planning Commission packet. Would you like me to share my screen?
Sure.
Yes, I'd like to see it.
Okay. Can you give me just a moment?
Lovely.
So this is the July 2020 monthly report. The August report does not come out until the end of August. In July, the lobby, which is where customer contacts usually occur, was open Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the Clackamas County building, and we received one customer from the City of Gladstone coming to have their questions answered. We had 53 emails or phone contacts. We had one building permit with land use review. We had no pre-application conferences scheduled. However, we did have one applied for that will be scheduled next month. And we had no administrative decisions.
Joy,
Yes.
I know I had, excuse me, I had asked at the last meeting regarding some sort of mechanism to follow through with our Cars Planets to see if they had submitted what they needed to you? Have you heard back from them?
I have not.
An email was sent?
I will have to look back. I do not remember if an email was sent to Cars Planet.
Okay. And then, after you do that, what would be our next step to ensure that they follow through with their updated, I believe it was landscaping plan, was it not?
Yes. If they do not comply with submitting the final landscaping plan and following through with what the Planning Commission required that they do, then it would be an enforcement issue.
Okay. And then would myself as a citizen need to go to our code enforcement and make sure that they follow up on that?
You can.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
A quick question, Joy. Customer phone calls and email contacts, is there anything that is relevant in even asking this question, what they're about?
So are you asking for clarity on what the common questions and emails are that we see?
Just is it worth even knowing? Is it just gibberish, or is it? I don't know. I'm asking. I have no question, no answers. I don't know.
A lot of the times, citizens who want to build a fence or a shed will call and request setback information. How far do I need it to be from my property boundary?
Okay.
That is a lot of the questions that we receive. There are no setbacks for fences, but if it's in the front of the property between the house and the street, there's a limit to the size of the fence. And so it's asking or answering questions regarding that type of information. It can be, I had a couple about accessory dwelling units. It's a hot topic right now. I had some requesting information about tonight's meeting.
Perfect. Okay. No, I make phone calls to Clackamas County all the time, and so I was just wondering what these conversations were, and you explained it very well. Thank you.
Okay. The one building permit that with land use review was a retaining wall at Buckingham Drive. And then as we are here tonight for the comprehensive plan and zoning map amendment and the potential code amendment, those are items that will be reviewed tonight.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners for Planner Fields? Okay, is there a motion to accept her report?
I accept. Mr. Williams accepts the report.
All right, we have a motion from
I'll
Commissioner
second
Williams.
that.
As Commissioner Poole, and welcome to the meeting, Commissioner Poole. So it's been moved and seconded that we accept the report of the plan of the contract planner. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the report is accepted. That moves us to item number 3 on the agenda, which is a continuation of the hearing we started last month regarding a potential change in zoning in the C2 area downtown. Mrs. Fields, if you would like to present the staff report for us.
I am happy to do so. So as you noted, the Planning Commission began a public hearing on proposed code amendments last meeting and decided to have a continuance of the public hearing tonight. And it is a public hearing regarding the parking standard when one community services facility or civic use is substituted for another on the same parcel. That is what the notice discussed, and that is what the original item was for. During the conversations last time, there was a need for additional background. And so while there was not a second staff report provided on this, this item, because you had already received a staff report, there is additional background that went out in your packet that included the Gladstone Downtown Revitalization Plan Executive Summary. And the Downtown Revitalization Plan was adopted by the City Council through Ordinance 1486. And it serves as a guide for code amendments in the downtown area. And so tonight's discussion of the C2 zoning district, which includes the area identified in the Downtown Revitalization Plan as the area of concern, is important to take a moment to review and consider. And some of the recommendations in the Downtown Revitalization Plan are very pertinent to the discussion of parking in the downtown. On page 39 of the Gladstone Downtown Revitalization Plan, there was a reference to reduce the minimum off-street parking requirement. And you'll see the excerpt here on the screen. The excerpt is that the current off-street parking requirements hinder the potential for higher density, mixed-use development. Additionally, in some areas, the parking requirements may be prohibitive for a single-story commercial development.
Hey, Joy, you're actually still showing the first slide.
Really? I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Well, it shows in the kind of in the margin on the left-hand side, but the main photo was still the original page 1.
There
There
we
you
go.
go. Better, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate it. So in the report, they noted that by reducing off-street parking requirements, the city will promote more efficient use of land and enable new development to be feasible on more sites. You'll also see on page 22 of the report, there was a figure 12 that had recommendations for streets and transportation and site development. And those also addressed parking. One of those that pertains to tonight's discussion was that the possible City Hall library project needed further study. And the downtown overlay to the modified C2 zoning, allowing additional by right development and further reducing parking requirements.
Joy?
Yes.
Just to interject here, you made reference to the possible library city hall project. As people that have lived in Gladstone know, for some time, the library has gone through several iterations. At one time during 2016, it was proposed that the city have a three-story building at the current City Hall site. The first 2 stories would be a library. The 3rd story would be a city hall. And that was about the time that the city filed a lawsuit against the county to get money to help with that project. That particular configuration of building obviously was, it never came to fruition. Instead, the city purchased a piece of property at the north end of Portland Avenue, and the city hall and the police station were built together at that location. But some references to combination library city hall may still exist in the downtown revitalization plan report because it was prepared during that 2016-2017 year.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that history. They did highlight the importance of the intersection where the old city hall was, being a focal point in the downtown area that could serve as a good project to highlight and spur other development. So last month, the Planning Commission looked at section 17.18.070 and recommended adding a clarifying point to clarify the intent of item number 1 under that section of the Gladstone Municipal Code, that when one commercial use allowed outright is substituted for another commercial use in an existing building, and the building is not expanded by more than 10% of the floor area used for commercial purposes on January 1, 1980, no more off-street parking shall be required than was proposed by the previous commercial use. The only modification that the Planning Commission discussed last month was that addition of the underlined commercial use. And that was the clarity that the Planning Commission thought may benefit the residents of the city of Gladstone.
Will you clarify that for me, what you just said, please?
I think I could take that. So we wanted to make sure that it was clear that a commercial use could be replaced with another commercial use specifically. But this didn't apply if the commercial use was replaced with something else.
Thank you. Okay.
The only change from what is currently in the Gladstone Municipal Code is the addition of that second commercial use that is underlined in red on the screen.
And it's been our understanding that that was the meaning all along, but we added those words to clarify it. One commercial use substituted for another is how it read originally, and we just added the words commercial use to make it more clear, less ambiguous.
Thank you.
Last month, the Planning Commission requested that they receive a copy of the PowerPoint in their packet. And so that was provided to you on Tuesday in your packet. And then staff had additional conversation with the city attorney. And there was a slight modification to address the concerns that the Planning Commission had last month. And so in your packet, in this item that has parentheses, instead of total lot coverage, it says developed area. But after discussing it with the city attorney, there is a definition of lot coverage in the Gladstone Municipal Code, whereas there are multiple definitions of development in the Gladstone Municipal Code. And so for clarity, staff would like the discussion of tonight's potential amendments to consider this and not what was in your packet. That small minor modification from developed area to total lot coverage.
Could you explain the difference of the floor area on the previous slide to the lot coverage on this slide?
Yes. Floor area is the measurement of the building's floor between external walls and under a roof. Floor area does not include private garages. One of the items that is included in a community service facility is a fire station. And fire stations have a lot of area that is a garage. And so the definition of floor area in the Gladstone Municipal Code clearly exempts private garages from being considered in the measurement of the floor area. But then it brings into a question of public garages. And would a fire station be considered in that measurement, or the garages that house the fire trucks, would it be included in that measurement or would it not? And so instead of using the definition of floor area for item number 2 that you are considering tonight, staff thought it might be more clean and clear if it was lot coverage. And what lot coverage is the area covered by a building or buildings on a lot. So that would include a bathroom at a park. That would include the garages of a fire station. That would include buildings that may not be necessarily homes that have a floor area.
How would this apply if the number of floors was being changed? So from like 1-story to 3-story, for example.
It would not.
Isn't this the standard code that is in Clackamas County for impervious surface? I mean, what you just read to me.
What a lot coverage means?
Yeah.
The city of Gladstone and Clackamas County have several definitions that are different and unique. What you have on the screen in front of you is the definition of lot coverage in the Gladstone Municipal Code.
Okay.
I am not positive if it's exactly the same as the Clackamas County definition of lot coverage.
Thank you.
I think we can move on and come back to this as part of the discussion time.
Okay. So an example of a community service facility that is planned for the C2 zoning district is the library that is planned for the old City Hall site. So remember, the community service facility was identified as a library or a park or a fire station. And so the previous City Hall building covered most of the lot. There was a small amount of landscaping that was around the front along Portland Avenue of the old City Hall building, as you can see in that image behind you or on the screen. But most of the 9,147 square foot lot was covered by building. The proposed new library is planned to be 6,000 square feet. And there is that caveat that it's regardless of design, because the library committee is considering 3 different designs and receiving public input on 3 different designs. But they are all 3 of them designed at 6,000 square feet. So that is the size of what is being proposed on the existing lot that is 9,147.6 square feet. Therefore, the new building will be significantly smaller than the current structure. It is also important to note that the proposed new library is 1 story instead of 2 stories. Again, this item number 3 is included in the conversation because if an item number 2 is included, then this number will be modified in the Gladstone Municipal Code to be item number 3. That's the only piece of this that would be changing if there are amendments to the Gladstone Municipal Code. As Malachi mentioned last month, it is important to note that this would be impacting the C2 zoning district. And the C2 zoning district is primarily along Portland Avenue, but there are a few other locations in the city of Gladstone that have the community commercial C2 zoning district designation. And so it's larger than just 1 lot. It would be the entire C2 zoning district.
The other one's down on Abernathy.
Yes. So as was mentioned, a community facility such as a fire station, library, community center, park, utility facility, or meeting hall are identified in section 17.18.020, item number 9. And so there would not be a need to provide a definition unless you wanted to define that specifically, but they already included it in the C2 zoning district section of the Gladstone Municipal Code. As we noted last month, there are sections of the Gladstone Municipal Code that allows the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing and make a recommendation to the City Council on a specific amendment to the Gladstone Municipal Code. And that is what we are considering tonight. Any amendments to the Gladstone Municipal Code are supposed to meet the goals of the comprehensive plan and the statewide planning goals. And so the comprehensive plan has a transportation goal to promote a safe, efficient, and convenient multimodal transportation system that emphasizes mass transit and a street circulation pattern designed to serve people first, to promote a decreased reliance on the private automobile. Therefore, staff consider that to be a goal that is being supported by the proposed change to the Gladstone Municipal Code, because it would be keeping the parking between when a lot is being redeveloped with a community service facility. The Gladstone Comprehensive Plan also has 2 policies that support the facilities and services goal. One is to continue to coordinate library services with Clackamas County to ensure that they keep pace with the present and future resident demand. And one is to continue to espouse a policy of concentrating library facilities and services in the existing central location. Tonight's public hearing will help to meet the statewide planning goal of citizen involvement. The goal number 11 of the statewide planning goals for public facilities and services does not include libraries. That statewide planning goal is focused on water and sewer services, but I wanted to include it here to contrast the Gladstone Comprehensive Plan from the statewide planning goals, and make note of that. And then goal 12 is to have an efficient transportation system for the statewide planning goals. Planning staff are recommending approval of the proposed text amendment changes to 17.18.070 to support the redevelopment of community service facilities in the C2 zoning district. And that concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Joy. I appreciate the work of the staff and the city attorney in helping to make the changes to this language that addressed some of the issues that came up at our last meeting. I know we didn't want any ambiguity about which kind of use was replacing what other kind of use, so you've clarified that. There was also concern about a possibility of a small building or a small use being replaced by a much larger one. You have addressed that as well. So I will open it up to the commissioners for questions and comments regarding these changes. And I understand we may also have some citizens who would like to ask questions or address the commission. So I will begin with the Planning Commission members. I will start with Commissioner Langston. Do you have any additional questions or comments about this?
No, no additional questions or comments. The added information tonight just reconfirmed my position from last week, so I'm good to go.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Natalie Smith. You'll have to unmute to address the commission.
You know, if we implement this change, how will it impact our existing businesses in the C2 zone? Will they stay as is, be grandfathered in, or will there be expectations from them?
Well, this would not address commercial properties. We're not making any changes in that other than adding the clarifying language that it's a commercial use substituted for a commercial use. And even though Planner Fields referenced the downtown revitalization plan and some of its recommendations regarding parking, we are not proposing any changes to parking requirements other than for this one particular matter of replacing a commercial site, I mean a
Community service
community
facility.
service site with another. Thank you for that word.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Malachi.
I appreciate the additional effort that went into updating that definition. The only concern I still have with it is that since it is not library specific, it does allow for single story to be replaced with multi-story, with it coming across as if it has the same requirements, and that could be problematic down the road. But other than that, I don't have any other concerns.
Commissioner, do you have a specific community service facility in mind when you talk about that being a problem down the line?
No, I mean, when I'm looking at laws that we're trying to put in place, I'm trying to look ahead to it not being us, not being the same city council, right? It could be a piece of property that was acquired by the city down the road, right? It doesn't have to be an existing property that we own. So I'm just trying to look at it from the point of view of a new law on the book and how does that play out? And I just want to make sure that we're putting the right restrictions in place.
Malachi, may I add on to what you just said? I believe that could be applicable to where the existing library is, if they should want to use it for something else. This, I mean, I see what he's saying. You want it to be able to be applicable to, I would imagine, any, what did you call that again, Joy? City use?
Community service facility.
Right. So that could be applicable to across the street. So it's a good thing to make sure we're clear about it.
Very good. All right. That's one example of another property that could fall into that category.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Poole. You'll need to unmute.
Misbehaving.
Sure.
Thank you. Can you? All right, we're live now. That was fun. I have no questions about the language and appreciate everything that's gone into it. But when we think about a transportation system, could you just give us a quick recap of the numbers calculations for traffic volume? That's really my question about the difference in traffic volume, not so much the footprint of the building or the overall concept. Is there a cap or is there something we need to do there?
This is not like a land use application when we have to study the number of trips or impact on the transportation in that way. So I'm afraid the answer is no. We're not examining it in terms of trip generation.
Well, I realize that that is not quite what we're doing, sir. I believe we're changing an ordinance, and in changing an ordinance, I'm bringing up a concern that is relative to the decision. I realize it's not testing, or you think to the earlier comments by the two previous commissioners about, we go to a different community service facility, whatever it may be. Well, something may be, parking may be a real issue for that. So again, my only concern is that we have a clear picture of how much parking we're I'm not saying giving away, but how that number works, because we all need to keep in mind that there's absolutely no guarantee that the existing library and its parking will remain in the future. In fact, we all want that to redevelop someday, and it will. So back to my original point, I think it's very relevant that we consider, is there a numerical limit, or is there something that we're overlooking in terms of, I'm looking for a cap, and if we could address that, I'd be comfortable. I'd be good with this.
If I may, I think that the issue is that the code we're looking at is not the code that's talking about that part of it, the trip generation, and maybe that trip generation part of the code also needs to be updated to cover what you're asking. And they're probably not looking at that because that wasn't something they needed to be changed to cover their current project.
Joy, do you have a comment?
I do. I would like to remind folks that in the C2 zoning district, the addition of site development, the change of use, major remodeling, they would all trigger a design review application that would be reviewed by the Planning Commission. And there is a height limit of 35 feet for buildings. And so even if it is a community service facility being replaced with another community service facility, they will still come before the Planning Commission. And while this allows them to not provide any additional off-street parking, the Planning Commission will be able to bring up their concerns when they see a land use application regarding traffic.
So we would not want to preclude their ability to bring it to us at this point. And at that time, when we're doing the design review, is it possible that the design review could include some recommendations as to, for example, assigning some of the existing on-street parking to be for library use only? The parking spaces that are along Dartmouth Avenue right now, or Dartmouth Street, adjacent to the current City Hall, could be designated library use only for the convenience of library patrons. And as Commissioner Poole states, although there's no guarantee, there is an existing piece of city-owned property that has the potential for being a parking site that would serve that area too. So plans for how parking could be accommodated for this building would come to us most likely at that point in the process, at the design review point. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Commissioner Williams.
Mr. Poole, Commissioner Poole, thank you, because your comment and consideration was exactly where I have the problem. And when it was just mentioned about having space, I have a parking problem, and I'm just stating it, personally. Gladstone is going to have a parking problem. If we're going to grow at all, we don't have overabundance of parking now. The library, who we have said that is going to be housing our parking, is not guaranteed. It's just until they find a better use for it, then they put a building. We've lost that parking. You had just mentioned, Commissioner, that we could have parking specifically designated on the street for the library, which I think is ludicrous because it's going to be taking away from what is giving Gladstone its tax base, which is its business that is on the street. We need to look forward into the future of where we're going to be and what we're going to really want to accomplish, and that is to bring people in. If we push people away because they have to park 7 blocks away, we're going to lose people. If we get the bridge in, we'll have people that'll walk, but those that want to come in and really visit and drive with their family or whatever are not going to be able to park anywhere close, and they will go on down the road. That is my issue with this.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Pat Smith.
I have no concerns, Mr. Chairman, that haven't been voiced already by others.
All right. All right, the language of the proposed text amendment has been presented. Is there, I understand, Tammy Bannock, we had an individual from the community who indicated a desire to address this issue tonight. Is that person here, and would they like to speak?
That person was Mindy Garlington, and I do not see her listed on here. If Mindy,
I am here, Tammy.
okay, perfect.
Sorry.
You are shown as resident.
I know. I'm away from my home and I can't seem to change what's here. I'm just here. That's all.
Okay. Mindy, thank you for coming tonight, and I'd like to hear from you.
Okay. So I was going to pass, but I would like to say one thing about the designated parking for the library. If I was taking my family downtown to Gladstone to get an ice cream cone or, at the shaved ice place, and all the parking said it was for the library, nobody was parked there, I'd be livid. So that being said, I've never had to walk more than a half a block to the library. It's good for us. It breathes fresh air. And I don't think that that should ever be done. It closes down what could be open for other good businesses that would be all day, all evening kind of thing. So that's my 2 cents. And I'm going to mute myself because I have a 3-year-old coming down the hall.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So you are in favor of the library site having to have on-site parking for the 6,000 square foot library?
Not necessarily. I think the parking that we have right now for our library building and the amount of use that it gets is adequate. So I don't think we need to go above and beyond what we already have in order to accommodate people within our city.
All right. Thank you for your input on this matter.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Milch, if I may,
Yes.
I would just say, you know, in fairness to others that may be here and you haven't heard from or heard about, just maybe open it up to anybody else in the public that might have a comment, please.
Good. Yes. Mindy let us know before the meeting that she was going to be here. Is there anyone else present who would like to address this issue? You can do so by, if your system allows it, there's sometimes a raise your hand thing you can do on the bottom of the screen, maybe under reactions. So you can indicate to Tammy Bannock and we can recognize you and hear from you. I'll wait a little longer. I don't see that. John Southgate, you are here from, John is one of the consultants working in the city that's working on some of the downtown development. Do you have comments regarding what you've heard tonight from folks about the what impact this library would have on the downtown revitalization and what direction we might proceed with this?
Yeah, I'll be brief. Just a few things come to mind. One is that I am really excited about the future of downtown Gladstone. And so I was retained, Jackie Betts, city administrator, hired me a couple years ago to help sort of counsel the city in what moves it should make. So I've been involved in helping to get funding for the trolley bridge and a couple of other projects. One specific item that I wanted to remind folks, I don't think it was mentioned earlier this evening, is that the downtown revitalization plan acknowledged that parking is always an important and sensitive issue. And I agree with a couple of your commissioners have said, you know, they don't want to see our success be such that we have a problem with parking. So as a reminder, the downtown revitalization plan included an element for a parking management program. I'm familiar with a number of cities, large and small, that you know, as they become more successful, they start running into a parking problem, and so they manage it. Sometimes it's through cooperation among different property owners. I remember an early one was McMinnville, which has a very successful downtown, successful Main Street program, and they have some city-owned lots that are available to shoppers. Corvallis has a successful program. So I think as you go forward, as new development might occur, which frankly I hope it does, I think Gladstone's in a great position, but it has to be done carefully. And I think implementing that idea of a downtown parking management plan when the time is right will help alleviate problems that may arise.
All right, thank you, John. Yes, the city did a parking study in 2006, which recommended an extensive management strategies for parking in the downtown area. That was also part of the recommendations on the downtown revitalization project. Things where you have a limited amount of time that people can park, and if parking is, if it becomes too full for that long amount of time, like a 4-hour time limit, you reduce it to a 2-hour time limit, so there's more turnover. Businesses want people to circulate and come in and out. They don't want their employees taking up the parking that their customers should be using. And So managing those issues and the location and the timing and enforcement of that will be very important. We don't usually do conditions with a zoning change, or I mean a code change, the way we do with a land use application. But you know, it might be that we'll agree to do this conditional on the city taking seriously the recommendation to have a well-managed parking management strategies, so that the concerns of the business community and the customers of these businesses will be adequately addressed by the city. All
Chair
right,
Milch, Chair Milch,
yes.
just if I might add too, you make me think of another thought. One of the nice things about a downtown parking management plan is you could adapt it as things evolve. You know, as a zoning code, as we all know, even from tonight, there's a lot of process involved. You have to get DLCD involved in Salem. I agree with you, Chair Milch. I hope that in the not too distant future, the city will work with property owners and business owners along Portland Avenue to develop a parking management plan, understanding that it'll adapt if there is more intensive development. Actually, when the trolley bridge opens, knock on wood, in a few years, 4 or 5 years, things will definitely be different. And I would not want to adopt a parking management plan that's going to be set in stone for the next 30 years, because things are going to change. That's one of the nice things, is it can evolve with participation from property owners and business owners.
All right, thank you for that input, John.
Okay. Excuse me, one thing.
Go ahead.
Where do we have, and again, I'm acceptance on pretty much how we figure this out, but where do we have any place to park if we take the library's parking spaces away? Where in Gladstone, being that it's all business, where else can anybody park is all I'm trying to bring up. And
So
there are
myself.
off-street. Oh, go ahead.
I was to say, for myself, coming to planning commission, I have had to park 3 to 4 blocks away at times if we were really busy that night. And usually it's in a residential neighborhood and then walking from there. And I think that's in general what people would have to do.
okay, let me ask this question then. With that being said, what's going to happen when our ADU in 10 years really starts to kick off and we have, instead of 2 people parking on the street, we've got 7 people parking on the street? And where are our businesses? I understand the trolley, and I understand the bridge, and etc. I'm wanting everybody to think this through, is why I'm bringing this up, because I'm looking into the future. 10 years from now, are we making the right decision to be done? I mean, it works now. I get it. That's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking down the road. Is it the right decision for us?
Well, as Mr. Southgate mentioned, one of the elements of a parking management plan could include shared parking facilities that are off-street parking that already exists. Malachi, when you come to planning commission meetings, I'm sure you don't park in front of Ray's Market or in front of the Teriyaki restaurant or the Vogies parking, because those are considered to be exclusive use to those businesses. And there are other parking lots associated with businesses up and down Portland Avenue. But one thing that sometimes happens with a parking management plan is that uses that have hours that don't coincide with one another are able to share the same parking. And with time limits, or occasionally with costs associated with parking, and doing what John Southgate suggested, adapting the plan as time goes on, you incrementally make your parking situation fit whatever your situation is now. We don't have as many downtown businesses as we did at one time, but we've heard that there's somebody proposing to open up the Happy Restaurant again. So as we see new development come in and people invest, we want to be sure that we accommodate their needs and make sure that people aren't parking permanently all day long to take the bus somewhere, but they are rotating in and out of parking spaces through good management.
I think Oregon City is a good example of where parking management went wrong, because all of the main street in downtown Oregon City looks really nice. I never go there because I spend an hour and a half driving in circles looking for parking. And so that's something we want to avoid.
Good parking management tries to keep 85% occupancy at all times so that there's always a space available in each block. And if you are experiencing that, that means that they're either not charging enough for the parking, it's too cheap and people park there for a long time, or they aren't having enough alternative parking spots available. That's a good observation. Thank you, Malachi.
If I may,
Yes,
a
Mr.
couple
Poole.
of things. One, we approved, and the council approved, a transportation community for the city shortly before the downtown plan was approved. And was parking, and our advisory role in that decision involved us basically kicking the can down the road. And we are not 10 years away from a parking problem. We're much closer. The problem is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing. And yes, we can manage it to a certain degree, but let's be serious, folks. We've all probably got to drive to town after this meeting, and you tell me where we're going to put parking, and the answer is almost nowhere. And so our transportation plan suggests a parking structure. Now, if anyone has $30 million, we can build a parking structure. So we are headed down a path that's very troubling, and we're heading down a path that makes Metro happy, but it's not the answer. And this issue is a recurring issue, and I understand we're trying to focus on a specific task at hand, but because this parking issue has not really been handled in trying to somehow make a code work so we can get the library open, because I don't think any of us is here of the library, and we all know that without this change, the library funding and the energy can't move forward. So maybe I'm getting in the weeds here, but I maintain that I think we can approve this. However, I still have a concern about how it applies elsewhere in town. And I go back to, do we just make this a one-time thing for the library? Or are we going to change the code for all the community services, but then not put any restrictions or expectations there? And that's where there's a real rub, and you can feel it in the testimony. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Poole. Yes, I think your comment about doing this for other community service facilities or versus this one project. Remember that the motion tonight is just regarding this one particular site. It's coming. The request from both the county and the city. Well, I mean, the reason it's being brought up is to address this one particular site. As I said before, we don't usually do conditions, but we have parking and transportation as part of our work plan for the year. And it would be my hope that we can make this one change to affect this one site and then deal more intensely with the other concerns that have come up regarding parking in the commercial areas and in the downtown area in general, and addressing what impact changes in the housing code would have on that, as well as Commissioner Williams mentioned. So
I think we all understand that this is something that the site needs, but we can't look at this as a site-specific rule.
Yes,
it's not.
Yes, I stand corrected on that. Right, it's not a site-specific rule, but the purpose was to address this one site. Well, the matter is before us. Would anyone like to make a motion that we approve the proposed text amendment as presented in tonight's staff report?
Chair Milch, I think you need to close the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I'll close the public hearing at this point and then move on for entertain a motion for acceptance of the code amendment.
Chairman Milch, this is Commissioner Smith. Do we refer to this by the file text number in making a motion?
Yeah, that would be good. Changes to 17.18.0. I think the recommendation on slide 11, if you could bring that up again, Joy, on the screen, that would help someone to make the motion.
Would you like the proposed change or would you like the recommended motion?
The recommended motion, slide 11, I think it is.
Yeah, it's just some simple language.
Okay, I move that we approve the proposed text changes to 17.18.070 to support redevelopment of community service facilities in the C2 zoning district.
All right, do we have a second?
I second that.
All right, moved by Commissioner Pat Smith, seconded by Commissioner Langston. We will do a roll call vote. Tammy, if you'll call the roll, please.
Commissioner Langston,
Yes.
Commissioner Natalie Smith,
We couldn't hear you, Natalie. You need to unmute.
Commissioner Natalie Smith, you should be unmuted.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Malachi?
No.
Commissioner Lespool?
I'm really torn. As you can imagine, I think others are. I'm a yes.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Commissioner Williams?
No.
Commissioner Pat Smith?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. So the motion passes 5 votes to 2. And I will say that I want to pass along to the City Council with this recommendation, the recommendation that we take a serious look at parking management in downtown. We existed for, what, 40 years or so with a city hall that had no off-street parking. We improved that situation by moving the city hall with a large parking lot in the north end of town. But we want to be sure that, that now that we're focusing on a revitalized area anchored by a library and commercial businesses, that we take a look at the parking. I appreciate all the comments that were made tonight in that regard. All right, the next item on the agenda is number 4. I was given a new script for online quasi-judicial hearings. And I appreciate that from our city attorney. So this is an item in which we will be receiving public testimony. Public testimony for this hearing will be called for in 3 groups: testimony in favor of the proposal, testimony opposed to the proposal, and neutral testimony. If you are participating online, you can click the raise hand button at the appropriate time and wait to be recognized. And if you are participating via telephone, you have to dial *9 to raise your hand at the appropriate time and wait to be recognized. And Tammy Bannock, our city recorder, will act as the moderator and making sure that people are brought on at the appropriate time. So time limits sometimes are, well, I'll put this out there now: 15 minutes for the applicant's presentation, 3 minutes for each audience member testifying, whether in favor or against or neutral. And then we allow the applicant to rebut to any testimony that it needs rebuttal. So I open this hearing for file number Z0149-20-D/CP. This is a rezoning of property to multifamily residential to allow the development of additional parking and recreation for the existing Webster Ridge apartments. Does any member of the Planning Commission intend to abstain from participation in this hearing for any reason? I hear none. This is the time I would ask if any member of the Planning Commission has a conflict of interest regarding this particular thing because of financial involvement with the applicant or someone who would be doing the work.
I have no conflict of interest.
All right. No one has declared a conflict of interest. At this point, I'll ask, we'll go down the line, starting with Commissioner Langston, and I will ask about ex parte contact, including visits to the site to familiarize yourself with what's being proposed, or any contacts you've had with people involved or people who have opinion about this that were outside of the normal hearing process. So Commissioner Langston, can you, we'll start with you. Do you have any ex parte contact to declare regarding this project?
No ex parte contact to declare at the moment.
Okay, and have you had an opportunity to visit the site?
I've been to the site. It wasn't for this matter a while back, but I am aware of the facility and the layout and the location.
Okay, good, thank you. Commissioner Natalie Smith, same question.
No, yeah, no ex parte, and I have visited the site.
Okay. Commissioner Malachi?
No ex parte. The last time I visited the site was 2015 as part of the last hearing.
Okay, you were on the commission during the hearing in 2015 when this was originally approved then, is that correct? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Les Poole, you were also on the Planning Commission at the time of this approval, I believe. Do you have any ex parte contact to declare at this time?
No, I don't, and you are correct. I was on the commission at the time.
All right. Commissioner Williams?
No ex parte, and yeah, it's in my neighborhood, so I'm very familiar.
You're familiar with it. All right. Commissioner Pat Smith?
Yes, I visited the site, and yes, I've had ex parte. I foolishly responded asking for comments or concerns on a social media post.
Okay, and I believe I also saw an email that you sent asking the school superintendent about this project. You copied me on that?
Yes, I'm not sure that's ex parte. It really didn't have anything to do with the project. It had more to do with whether the schools could handle additional students.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Smith. That would be, just to, so everybody's benefit, that would be ex parte in this instance. And just to be a little bit more specific with respect to the social media post, can you describe maybe the forum and the date, just so people can, if they have any issues?
It was within the past week. I'm not sure of the name. It was, I believe, a portion of Facebook, and someone had raised concerns about this, more of a complaint than a concern. And I was looking for something more specific and simply asked for a concern. It was in the past week. That was the end of it. The response didn't meet my interest level and what a concern might be, so I said nothing else.
Okay, thank you.
And I have also visited the site. I drove through a couple times in the past week to kind of envision where the the property in question is located in relation to the rest of the property. I have not had ongoing, or have not discussed it except with my wife here, and she will not be participating in the program tonight. And also, I did go back and review and listen to the audio of the hearing from 2015 of when the original project was being proposed so that I was familiar with the numbers involved, the number of units and the number of parking spaces that were done at that time. I wanted to understand how that was established. That's my ex parte involvement. Okay, is there anyone in the,
Actually, before you do,
Yes.
just in case anybody else does want to look that up, that was July 2015, if they want to look it up on our city website.
That's right. The audio of the meeting is still there. There's not a video, but the minutes and the audio and the original agenda application are available. And that's, I found it very helpful and relevant to tonight's discussion, which is why I brought it up, and I will share some of those facts if it comes up in the meeting. All right. I'm asking now the audience involved tonight, are there any challenges to any of the declarations? Is there anyone who believes that a commissioner should not hear this hearing tonight? I don't see any raised hands on the screen, so I think we're good to go.
Chair Milch,
Yes.
I would like to unmute everyone just in
Okay.
case there was a need to do so. Those people who chose to mute themselves, I'm unable to unmute them. But if you would like to speak up, I have done the co-host administration of unmuting everyone.
All right, thank you. So if you, yeah, you're now able to unmute yourself when it comes time to speak.
Thank you.
You should re-ask them if anybody wants to.
All right, I will ask that question again. Does anyone want to unmute and challenge anyone's right to participate in this hearing? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Let me remind you, in this kind of a land use hearing, if you testify, you must raise all issues you wish to address at this hearing. If your issue is not raised at this hearing, it cannot be raised later in any appeal. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved and include your proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. Because this is the initial evidentiary hearing, state law grants any party the right to request a continuance of this hearing or ask that the record remain open after the hearing is closed. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing or by the close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. There ends the standard language. I call now on staff to present the report. Joy?
Okay. So I would like to clarify that when the application was received by Clackamas County, it was named Z0149-20-D. However, comprehensive plan amendments in the past have had a CP at the end. And so for this presentation, you will see that added to the name because this is an application for a comprehensive plan amendment and a zoning map change. So that D, I believe, was incorrectly attributed to this application. However, it should be noted that the CP was added to clearly identify the subject of the application. In case anyone had any questions. So The project location for Z0149-20 is 18085 Webster Road, and it is adjacent to the Webster Ridge Apartments. And the proposal is to rezone 1.04 acres of land that is currently zoned R7.2, which is a single-family, low-density residential zoning district, to a multifamily residential zoning district, which is MR. And therefore, change the zoning map and amend the comprehensive plan to reflect the new zoning designation. That is what is being considered tonight. As noted, the current designation for the 1.04 acres is R7.2 and is a low-density residential zoning district. The entire parcel is highlighted by this light blue boundary and is in fact 2.79 acres. 2.12 acres of the parcel is zoned R7.2, and 0.85 acres is already zoned multifamily residential, and that is this section up here. I have included an excerpt from the zoning map in this presentation so you can see the current zoning for the parcel in question on the right of the screen. And it shows that that parcel is split zone. Public
Joy,
noticing.
excuse me, Joy, just for clarification, the portion of the property that is currently zoned multifamily residential that you pointed out at the right of the screen, is the building that's shown there a multifamily residential building, or is it a church building?
It is my understanding that that is a church building on property that is zoned multifamily residential.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome. The apartments are below the tax parcel that is highlighted in blue. And so it includes this area here, and then these apartment buildings around the edge of that parcel. So because this is a comprehensive plan amendment and zoning map change, notice was sent to DLCD as required by the state. It was also sent to property owners located 250 feet from the subject property, and notice was sent to the Clackamas review. Comments were received by the City of Gladstone Fire Department and Engineering Department, and neighbors also provided comments. The applicant also provided notes from meetings with neighbors, and that has been added to the file as comments. So usually when you all see a land use application, we go through the staff report. Tonight, to reduce any concern with what the Gladstone Municipal Code says and what the staff report says, I have formatted this presentation to go through the Gladstone Municipal Code as staff would looking at the application. And so 17.68.010 creates the authorization for initiating amendments. And you'll notice that an amendment to the zoning map or the comprehensive plan may be initiated by application of a property owner, contract purchaser, or authorized agent of the subject property. And tonight's land use application was submitted by the contract purchaser for that 1.04 acre portion of the parcel. On the screen in front of you, there is an aerial image dating back to 2018 of the 1.04 acre portion of the tax parcel. You'll notice that north is to the left, but I wanted you guys to have a clear visual from an aerial perspective to see how this is situated in relation to the existing apartments. As you see, this portion of the parcel is adjacent to the Webster Ridge Apartments, and the Webster Ridge Apartments is served by sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and water. And it is any future development of this acreage for multifamily to support the existing apartments could be served from extensions from the adjacent property. Gladstone Municipal Code section 17.68.020 establishes the review process that requires that comprehensive plan amendments and zoning map changes follow the administrative procedures in Division 7 of the Gladstone Municipal Code, which clearly says that the Planning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council for zone changes and comprehensive plan amendments, which is why we are here tonight. Section 17.68.040 outlines conditions, the conditions that the Planning Commission can put on zone changes. And I wanted to highlight two pieces of this. The conditions that are applied to this zone change include the type of conditions, and they can be special measures designed to limit use or density, to screen or separate buildings or portions of the site from adjoining property, to limit access from important thoroughfares or through residential areas, to provide additional right-of-way from an abutting street, to preserve or provide public access to green space, floodplains, or river frontage, and to improve bicycle or pedestrian safety and connectivity, or improve transit capacity and efficiency. So in the staff report, there are some conditions that are crafted for you to consider. And as you look at them, you want to make sure it's a type of condition that you are allowed to put on it. And that brings in number 4, which no variance of the ordinance standards is allowed. So you're not able to say that a use that would be prohibited in the zoning district would be allowed on the property. The special conditions included in the staff report include limiting the use of the rezoned parcel to be developed with land uses customarily considered accessory to multifamily residences, in addition to recreational uses. A second condition of approval to address some of the neighbors' concerns that were received prior to the crafting of the staff report was lighting. The future development of the site shall provide limited lighting and any lighting installed shall meet the minimum amount required to meet the City of Gladstone Public Works requirements. So the City of Gladstone Public Works has requirements to ensure the safety of people and property. However, there's a concern of light from the existing apartments leaving the site. And so by having a special condition, that would ensure that the lighting installed was the minimum amount required, may serve to address the concerns. And then there's screening. The application provided included note of future development on the site and noted that if approved for the zone change, there would be further land use applications for a property line adjustment to absorb the 1.04 acres into the existing Webster Ridge apartment property. The Webster Ridge property has a retaining wall along one edge of it, and there is a limit in the Gladstone Municipal Code that limits fence and wall height to 6 feet. With the retaining wall, it is hard to have a screen that would screen the apartments from the adjacent neighbors when the retaining wall plus the fence can only be 6 feet. So you'll see this and be able to consider it at the end of the presentation tonight. But again, this is getting back to the types of conditions you can apply on a zone change. In 17.68.050, it sets out the evidence that the applicant is to provide. And pursuant to this section of the Gladstone Municipal Code, the applicant is supposed to provide evidence that granting the request fulfills a public need, and the greater the departure from the present development policies or land use patterns, the greater the burden on the applicant. So the more evidence the applicant has to provide if the zone change would be very different from the present development policies. And current policies is low density residential, and the proposed policies would be multifamily residential. The evidence supplied by the applicant is to follow, and the application proposed to eventually increase the availability of recreational open space to the Webster Ridge apartments, and by extension, increase the health and well-being of city's residents. The applicant provided evidence that the buildable land inventory and the preliminary housing needs analysis that was completed by Eco Northwest in September of 2019 showed that the subject property was partially vacant in the buildable lands inventory and could be redeveloped to address the housing needs. Ultimately, the housing needs report calculated that the high density residential designation has a deficit capacity of 80 dwelling units, meaning there's a deficit of 3 acres of high density residential land in Gladstone. Now, this is a draft buildable lands inventory and a draft preliminary housing needs analysis that has not been adopted by City Council. However, the housing needs analysis and buildable land inventory that has been adopted by City Council dates back to 1979. And the housing needs analysis from back then also showed a need for additional housing. You will be having a workshop next week on the draft preliminary buildable land inventory and housing needs analysis that Eco Northwest is updating for the city of Gladstone. However, getting back to this application, this is the evidence supplied by the applicant. With the proposed condition of approval prohibiting additional dwelling units on the subject property or limiting the development of that property to accessory uses in conjunction with multifamily residences, the application will neither increase nor decrease the city's supply of buildable high-density residential land. It will, however, facilitate occupancy of 15 available multifamily units in the city, which is consistent with the need shown in both the 1979 and 2019 housing needs analysis. This is a quote from the application that was provided by the applicant. The departure from present development policies or land use patterns was found by the applicant to be limited because the subject property is has no local street connections available to it unless they use the church property or the existing apartments. And utilizing the proposed part of the church property closest to the apartment complex for an accessory multifamily use with surrounding open space and single-story garage for buffers to the surrounding residential neighborhood, the applicant considered to be less intrusive than developing the entire church property at the current single-family and townhome zoning density. It is important to note that the Gladstone Municipal Code requires the applicant to provide evidence that the public need is best carried out by granting the petition for the proposed action, and that the need is best served by granting the petition at this time. So not in 5 years, but right now, is this application filling a public need that is important to the city of Gladstone? And the evidence supplied by the applicant is in support of this was that the Webster Ridge apartment complex is not fully occupied due to the lack of parking, based on the experience of the property management and move-out interviews from past residents. I asked the applicant if they had conducted a survey of current residents, and an official survey had not been conducted. The applicant provided the following information about the parking that's available. Each apartment is assigned 1 parking space. And in the month of April of 2020, there were 4 rented garages, and the remaining parking spaces, including 4 ADA spaces and 63 undesignated spaces, were available to residents with a second vehicle and visitors and staff on a first-come, first-served basis. The applicant provided information that most of the units have at least 2 adult occupants with an average of 1.54 persons per unit. And the April 2020 resident parking demand for 107 occupied units was 156 vehicles, which equals 1.46 spaces per unit.
Joy, I have a question.
Yes.
You stated that a survey of the residents was not done, but the applicant has provided sort of a spreadsheet showing the number of people per unit and the number of vehicles. When you say a survey, do you mean a survey of their opinions regarding the appropriateness of this, or what kind of survey does that refer to?
They did not send out a survey to every resident asking how many vehicles, if additional parking was needed, if the parking could be resolved with a management protocol. And so they provided the evidence that they have, and that is all that they could do without an official survey. And I am not sure, I'm not stating that a survey would have provided additional information, because surveys are not always filled out by every resident. I just wanted you to know that they're providing evidence, but it's not in the form of a survey.
Okay, that clarifies it. Yeah, the evidence that was provided seemed like a survey to me, so it did, it helped inform, you know, provide information that was helpful in considering this. Thank you.
The Webster Ridge Apartments, as noted in the introduction of this meeting, received land use approval in 2015. And that approval was for 122 dwelling units with a minimum of 183 spaces. I believe 184 spaces was what was approved. And although the Webster Ridge has 183 spaces, the applicant provided evidence that less than 170 are typically available for additional vehicles and to serve tenants. Once parking for staff, maintenance personnel, garages, and handicap accessible spaces are considered. 3 garages are reserved for apartment maintenance, removing those 3 garages from the parking spaces available. 2 garages were leased to tenants without a requirement that they be used for parking, and they are used for storage. And so there, in April of 2020, there were about 18 spaces available for staff, visitors, and undisclosed vehicles. Those vehicles that the residents did not claim on their application. The proposed future surface parking, garage, storage, and open space area would be accessory uses for the existing apartments. And the Gladstone Municipal Code defines accessory use as a use or structure incidental and subordinate to the main use of the property and located on the same lot as the main use. Because it has to be on the same lot as the main use, if the 1.04 acre parcel is rezoned tonight, it could not be developed with parking and storage unless it was absorbed into the lot with the apartments or part of a larger development, because you are unable to have parking and garages and open space as accessory uses without a primary use. And that primary use has to be on the same parcel as the accessory use.
Yeah, these are residences.
Right.
I mean, the zoning is residential, so you can't decide you want to store things there or build a garage and say, well, someday I might build something else.
Right. So the applicant said, because there's no space on the apartment site for additional parking, this application is necessary to allow accessory parking on the subject property. And the approval of this application will be followed by a lot line adjustment to request the combination of the 1.04 acre rezoned lot with the existing lot. In addition to identifying whether it fills a public need and is needed at this time, the applicant had to provide evidence that the proposed action is consistent with the comprehensive plan and Metro's functional plan and the transportation planning rule. And so looking at the comprehensive plan for Gladstone, the comprehensive plan includes a land use planning goal that is to provide and maintain a high standard for Gladstone's quality of life and to ensure a factual base for land use decisions and actions, and to establish a planning process and policy framework for this purpose. Within that, there is a residential use policy, number 5, that says allow housing types ranging from low to high density units, providing for variation in the design of housing units. Staff found that it was unclear from the quantitative data whether the additional parking would fill the vacant apartment units. In April, as that spreadsheet showed, the vacant apartment units were primarily one-bedroom units. And so there could be things other than parking that come into play on why those apartment units remain vacant. However, the applicant did provide qualitative data from the experience of the property management and previous residents to support that there is a need for additional parking. So the land use planning goal that says that a factual basis should be used for land use decisions, I wanted to make sure that you all considered both the quantitative data as well as the qualitative data, because both of those are factual data to be considered. In addition, the applicant highlighted the housing goal, which is to meet the housing needs of all segments of the population through optimum utilization of housing resources for the construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of the diversity of housing types at appropriate locations, price ranges, and rent levels, while preserving and enhancing the integrity and identity of existing residential neighborhoods. Policy number 2 says specifically promote the development of high-density housing around commercial and industrial centers served by mass transit transfer options. The applicant provided evidence that the Webster Ridge apartments have a number of TriMet bus stops nearby, including northbound and southbound Webster and Cason stops, as well as a stop at the 1800 block of Webster Road. TriMet bus lines 31 and 32 also have stops nearby on Oakfield Road.
Joy,
Yes.
if I could, I believe it's the 18000 block on Webster, or am I? Yeah, 18
Right,
block gets
you're
you
right.
down there in the river. Yeah, that's
You are
fine. Just a
correct,
minor
Commissioner Poole.
adjustment to the language.
Thank you. And I forgot the 0 in block, so thank you. So the applicant provided evidence that this, or argued that this provides residents with access to alternative transportation and the commercial areas of town. Policy 4, in support of the housing goal, is to promote the upgrading and preservation of existing housing units and neighborhoods with special emphasis on historically significant homes. One of the items within this policy is to explore ways of encouraging an ongoing maintenance program of existing multifamily structures and landscaping. The applicant provided evidence that the proposed additional parking would have been allowed if presented with the original land use application in 2015. The Gladstone Municipal Code does not have a maximum amount of parking for multifamily residential developments. It has a minimum amount of 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, but it does not include a maximum number of parking units per dwelling unit.
Joy, excuse me, can you, what are they recommending for the max or for the amount of parking spaces per unit?
They're recommending the addition of 26 units. I'm not sure what that comes out to, but remember, this is a zone change and a comprehensive plan amendment. And similar to the discussion in the C2 zoning district for parking, you can't rely on future development when you're considering the zone change.
Got it. Thank you.
So you can create limits for how the land is zoned and used for the future. You can create conditions for screening, but they will have to come before you again with a land use application prior to developing any parking on that site. And so they are requesting a zoning map change and comprehensive plan amendment with the intent of applying for future land use applications for additional parking in recreation or open space. But I want to make sure that that future intent is not determining your decision tonight unless it is important for you determining if the need, the public need is there, and the public need is best granted by, or best addressed by granting this application tonight. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And Joy,
Yes.
just to clarify Commissioner Williams' question then, this is not a request to change the minimum parking requirement to a higher number, which would allow,
No.
which would have allowed more space or would have mandated more spaces. This is only a request to create a situation where more parking could be added at a future date if an appropriately zoned parcel was adjacent to the existing property. Thank you.
And a land use decision was, or land use application was approved by the Planning Commission.
Right. Two-step process.
Yes.
To be clear, I appreciate your explanation. That was good. And to be clear, we're making a decision for a zoning change, and that zoning change is to residential, and much of this language addresses housing. And our decision can't be based on the merits of, while initially they want to use it for parking, sometime down the road, if they can get an approval to build there someday, we're certainly not here to prohibit that or create unreasonable conditions to prevent that, or have that drive our decision, correct?
Correct.
Good.
The reason the housing goal is applicable is because you are increasing the density of housing allowed on that zoning parcel. You would be modifying it from a low density residential zoning district to a multifamily residential zoning district, which is a medium or high residential zoning district.
And it's compatible because that does exist next door. I mean, it's not like we're doing something that's radically, in this case, it's a coincidence, or if we're all talking about the same ownership. But even so, if this was someone else, our decision would be made the same way. And part of our decision would be, well, what exists next to this?
The proposal
and what exists next to this is compatible because it's already multifamily. And so I don't want to talk circles, but part of the approval is, well, what else is going on in the neighborhood? And in this case, what's going on is right next door. And it's the same zoning that they're asking for, right? Is there, it's multifamily residential. There's No.
The existing parcel, in fact,
No.
also contains multifamily residential.
To that.
So,
And
No,
that, real quickly, that multifamily residential is, if it's zoned R7 now, the multifamily aspect, is that because of the change in the law, or am I missing something there? In other words, we're now allowing, House Bill 2000 has changed the paradigm. So a little in the weeds, I'm confused as to which part of this is multifamily and which part isn't. When you say it's R7, I'm getting lost here.
would you like me to go back to the current zoning map?
Yes, because you had a sideways view of it. Because it's clearly, you know, an odd lot that was left over from other places. Okay.
So the zoning map is on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the black arrow is pointing to a section of a parcel that is currently zoned R7.2. But the entire parcel is 2.79 acres and currently has a portion zoned multifamily residential and a portion zoned R7.2. So tonight you are considering whether it is
The 1.4?
1.04 acres.
1.04. Yeah, that's fine.
Right
Thank
out
you.
here. Yes. I'm gonna zoom back to where I was.
How do you know where you were? We're trying to.
I was right here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joy, this is Commissioner Pat Smith. Could you, you know, this started out talking about parking and maybe an expansion of buildings for recreational use. Can you explain to me, if this passes, what are all the things that can be done with this property? Can the apartment complex be expanded and build more of the same on it, or is it exclusively for parking and property uses for recreational and storage?
That would depend on the conditions that the Planning Commission place on their on the special conditions that you place on the rezoning. I would also like to note that the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. And so the final authority rests with the City Council unless it's appealed. And so,
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish. I didn't mean to cut you off.
so we are talking about parking because that is what the application, or what the applicant indicated in their application as the future use of the parcel. And you, as Planning Commission, can make a recommendation that there be a special condition to limit the use of this newly zoned multifamily residential zoning district to accessory uses only. So maybe only parking, playgrounds, swimming pool, and recreational use.
Could you roll back to your map and show me where ingress, egress into this would be if it was used only for parking? How would they get in there?
So here is Webster Road. Do you
Right.
see my cursor?
Yes, I can see you. Up Webster Road. Now you've entered the property.
I've entered the property. Here's the pool.
Right.
I go past the pool. The plan that was submitted, that is actually a couple slides further in the presentation, shows the access to future parking right here.
Okay.
And then this area to the left on their proposal for the future development would be retained in open space used for recreational use. If it is conditioned by the Planning Commission and conditioned by City Council.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Again, the applicant had to provide evidence that the proposed action is consistent with not only the comprehensive plan, but also Metro's functional plan. And so the Metro Urban Growth Functional Plan has policies that include a number of items that are not applicable to this application, but they do have Title I, which requires each city and county to maintain or increase its housing capacity. And so by increasing the density of this parcel from low density residential to medium or high density residential, you are increasing housing capacity.
Would House Bill 2001 in effect do that anyway?
What House Bill 2001 would do is say that this property is zoned for single-family detached residential units. And now you can put duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes on it.
That's what I was alluding to.
The city has not made any changes to their code in relation to House Bill 2001, except for the parking of the accessory dwelling units and the owner occupancy. You guys will see more about House Bill 2001 after the state comes out with a model code. We don't even know what the state is suggesting that jurisdictions do. And so this is a multifamily residential zoning district would be above and beyond a triplex or a duplex or a quadplex. And so if it was rezoned without any special conditions, you could have upwards of 8.9 units on there per acre. Whereas House Bill 2001 for low density residential zoning would be more like 5.2 dwelling units per acre. So it's a significant increase in density for the housing.
Maximum of House Bill 2001 in and of itself would increase the capability to have more housing. It wouldn't necessarily all be single-family homes.
It would. However, getting back to the future development that the applicant is wanting to do, House Bill 2001 would not allow accessory uses on a parcel of land without a primary use already there. So you couldn't have parking garages for the apartments without having the apartments there.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. So the proposed action also has to be consistent with the transportation planning rule. And the statewide transportation planning rule aims to provide and encourage a safe, convenient, and economic transportation system. As conditioned, limiting the use of the, if the Planning Commission chooses to limit the use to accessory uses, then you would not be increasing the number of dwelling units, and therefore you would not be adding trips to the existing transportation system that was not considered during the original land use application. The Gladstone Municipal Code continues and requires that the applicant provide proof that if it's a significant change in the neighborhood or community or a mistake in the planning or zoning for the property under consideration when relevant. The neighborhood is currently a mix of single-family residential, multifamily residential, church, and open space. The applicant does not contend that the application is necessary to address a mistake in the zoning of the property. And rezoning would require subsequent land use applications to allow the applicant to update the existing apartment complex to meet the need of property management and owners. The need for additional parking that has been identified. The code also requires that the property of affected area is presently provided with or concurrent with development can be provided with adequate public facilities, including but not limited to the planned function, capacity, and performance standards of the transportation system as adopted in the transportation system plan. The property is adjacent to areas that have water, sewer, and streets. So the property you are considering for rezoning is adjacent to the fully developed apartment complex that have streets, water, sewer, and storm drainage facilities. The rezone land would be followed by additional land use applications that would address the adequacy of the water, sewer, and storm drainage facilities. And as discussed, the statewide transportation planning rule is really important to consider. And the applicant reached out to Lancaster Mobley and contracted with Jessica Hajar to evaluate the impact of this rezoning on the city's transportation infrastructure. And they concluded that the application will not significantly affect an existing or planned transportation facility. The property is adjacent to Webster Ridge Apartments and is planned for future use as accessory uses to those existing apartments. And no additional units are proposed. And if you limit the use of the rezone land to prohibit additional units, then no additional dwelling units would be there to affect the transportation system, which includes Webster Road. So you all have asked about the future development. And this is what the applicant provided to as part of their application. Again, Webster Road is out here. You would enter through the parking lot to gain access to the additional garages and storage units. And then there's the recreational area.
Joy?
Yes.
I have a question. It wasn't until just a minute ago that you used the term prohibit housing on the land. I read the applicant's original report and they had suggested language that used that word, but
Yes.
your decision instead affirmatively mentions the limited uses that would be put to use of parking and recreational use. Can you explain why perhaps, and maybe Mr. Doofman can weigh in on this too, why you preferred the language that mentioned the uses that would be there rather than a specific language that mentioned prohibition of other uses?
I personally like positivity, and I find prohibition to be negative. And so we are saying the exact same thing. By prohibiting future development, it is the same thing as requiring that the rezoned land be developed with land uses customarily considered accessory to multifamily residences. So the choice is up to the Planning Commission. whether they limit the development to uses customarily considered accessory, or if they scratch that and say prohibit future dwelling units.
I
Thank you.
would just weigh in real quickly that when you start doing prohibitions, you start creating long lists and you leave things out. And so I do understand that your explanation about it being more positive. I think it's also more, I think it's more understandable. I really do. Because if I say don't do this, or this is prohibited, or that's prohibited, and then we run into something that we forgot to prohibit. And so I understand your wording and what you're saying, and we're getting to the same place, because our goal is to either approve or make a recommendation to approve this if we're comfortable with the conditions we place on it. So I think the bigger issue is we have our 7.2 zoning here, and is the city's supply of our 0.27 zoning adequate in the eyes of LCDC? Because ultimately they look at this. So do we factor that into this? I think we're okay with that, and I don't object to what's going on, but it's a question that keeps popping into my mind.
And that is where it would be nice to have a recent billable lands inventory and recent housing needs analysis to rely on. The 2019 preliminary buildable lands inventory and what you will see next week show that there's currently land zoned low density residential that could be developed in the amount of like 1 acre, but there's no available land zoned multifamily residential.
Good, because part and correct me if I'm not accurate in this, we have to weigh that. In other words, if we are giving up a little R7, and in this case, I don't see it as a problem, but we do have to consider that in our thinking. And I'm not hung up on it, but it's, you know, we're in a way, aren't we? We're looking for an eventual state approval of this. And I'm not trying to get too far down the road, but won't they ask that question? Because I just don't want it to come back or be rejected at a later date because we overlooked this aspect. I'm completely comfortable and I'm not objecting to anything. I'm asking a question to avoid issues down the road.
It is a very good question to ask, because limiting future use of this property means that residences can't be developed there. And so if you go forward with special condition number 1, or as the applicant proposed, a prohibition to dwelling units, then you are taking 1 acre out from even being low density residential zoning. So you would be taking out 5.2 dwelling units from the supply of future housing if you limit future use on this zoning district. And so it is something to consider. Do you want that special condition? Or do you want to rezone it without a limit to future development, with the knowledge that it could be developed with apartments? Or do you want to leave it as it's currently zoned for the potential of 5.2 residences at the historic development levels? That is something that the Planning Commission should consider. And so I'm glad that you asked that question. Commissioner Poole.
So, Chair Mills, if I may just briefly touch on a couple of these issues. The first thing I would just mention to Chair Milch's question about whether you phrase it in the positive or the negative. I don't have a lot of preference one way or the other. I certainly see the logic, and instead of trying to come up with a long list of what's prohibited, it does, I think, largely is easier to write in terms of what's allowed, and everything else is presumed to be excluded. It also is more positive. I think that's a good thing too. I would say that I think it might be good to say, and we're getting maybe we still haven't even heard from the applicant yet. I think it's important to have that public testimony. Could you go back to the slide for a second?
Yes.
Joy, there's a.
Do you want me to write notes while you speak, like I did at last month's meeting?
I don't. If you want to, I just want to kind of comment
Okay.
more generally. I think it might be good to, say something that would be, if that's the route we go, that right now it says shall be developed with land uses considered to be accessory. To me, that could be read to suggest that it has to at least have that, but it wouldn't necessarily be limited to that. So maybe getting some limitation in there somewhere would be appropriate if that's the intent. And then on the DLCD matter, I guess the other thing I would in addition to the comments that have been made is they've gotten notice, the state's gotten notice of this, Metro would have gotten notice of this as part of the process, and certainly they have every right to participate and comment, and if they have concerns, they're free to raise those. And so for, again, our purposes as where we are right now, I would suggest that you maybe allow for the possibility that if there were a concern, and certainly DLCD is not shy to point those out if they have them, that at the very least they have the opportunity to participate in the process and raise those. So I wouldn't get too wrapped around the axle about that 1 acre issue, although overall that certainly factors into the larger housing issues that the city and Metro would need to consider.
So, Mr. Doofman, may I ask a question? In that first paragraph, if we were to add the word, for example, to rezone shall be developed exclusively with land uses customarily accessory, a word like that would clarify that this was solely for the purpose of that kind of development. Would that be the kind of thing you were referring to?
That's correct. Yep, I think that would work.
Okay, thank you.
If that's the route you wanted to go with keeping it either, not broader than just the accessory uses such as parking.
Well, and part of the reason I brought it up too was to get on the record the fact that it was the applicant who suggested the prohibition of more dwelling units. They didn't come to us asking for more apartments and then the staff said, no, just do parking. They came asking for parking alone, and we want the public to be aware that this was not an effort to add even more new units, that they want to be able to rent out the units that they have that they're unable to rent because, as they say, of the shortage of parking, inadequate current parking. All right, thank you.
Good.
So Joy, I think you are at the place now where you are recommending approval of some conditions associated with the proposed rezoning. Finish your report and then we'll get to the testimony from the applicant and the public.
This is the second time you are seeing these special conditions, and I want, they were in light of comments from the public and from the applicant. The future use was a special condition of approval that the applicant recommended, a prohibition of additional units. lighting and screening are other considerations for the Planning Commission to consider. I would like to say that you all received some of the public comments in your staff packet. Staff received additional public comment yesterday, and I believe those were emailed out to you by Tammy. And so there are additional public comments that may inform the wording of these special conditions or additional special conditions that you may consider after hearing the public testimony. So I will leave my presentation at that and realize that you all may want to come back to this after hearing the public testimony. It is also worthy to note that the statewide planning goals were addressed by the applicant. And they are highlighted here for you to realize that the applicant did their due diligence and noted that they are not proposing to reduce the density of land zoned for residential purposes and are therefore in line with state legislation. And I will stop sharing at this time.
Okay, I believe it's appropriate at this time to hear directly from the applicant. If the applicant would like to add more information for the commission at this time, and then we will hear from the public after that. So who is here representing the applicant tonight? Mr. Robinson, I see you raising your hand. I recognize Mr. Robinson. Let's be sure that he is unmuted. You need to unmute yourself as well. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good. Hi, Chair Milch, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Michael Robinson. My last name is spelled R-O-B-I-N-S-O-N. My mailing address is 1211. Robinson's not a hard name to spell, but I do it anyway. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland, 97209. I'm a land use attorney representing the owner of the property. I worked with Joy and the applicant to put together the application narrative. I should say we appreciated working with Joy and we appreciate the positive staff report. Joy, we're in favor of positivity as well. With me tonight, we also have 3 other people, and Chair, you're free to ask during the hearing, you and your colleagues, any of us questions. That's why we're all here tonight. So in addition to myself, Hans Tygeson, who is the owner of the project, is here. He's the one that took the approval through in 2015 for the apartment project. Bob Sanders, who is Hans' project manager, is also present tonight. And Jessica Hygar, who is the traffic engineer with Lancaster Mobile, who prepared the March 2020 traffic analysis this year. So the reason we're all here is to answer your questions. I'll go through the testimony and I'll explain, in addition to Joy's good job, how we meet the approval criteria and why the Planning Commission should recommend approval of City Council. But before I do that, Chair, I want to go back and touch on answers to questions by Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Poole, and yourself. And I'd also ask if there's a way for you to do it. Is it possible for you to send me the public testimony you received today by email, and maybe I can look at that before rebuttal? If you can, I'd appreciate it. If not, that's fine.
I will ask Tammy Paddock to forward that to you if she can.
Thank you so much. So let me start with Commissioner Smith's questions. I thought you asked exactly the right question. The reason that we proposed the prohibition on new principal permitted uses, multifamily dwelling units, is to assure not just this body and the City Council, but the neighbors that this wasn't an application to put more multifamily units back there. It's simply an application that lets us correct a problem we didn't anticipate at the time we did the project in 2015, which is, even though the majority of the units are 1 bedroom, there's simply not enough parking. So we proposed, and it's shown at page 6 of the staff report, we proposed the condition that would prohibit apartments. We're fine with special condition of approval 1 that the planner recommended. That makes sense to us. And Chair Milch, I think your idea of adding the word expressly is a good way of emphasizing to the public that It's expressly for accessory uses such as open space, storage units, and parking, and not for multiple family dwellings. So if that's ultimately what the Planning Commission chooses to recommend tonight, we're comfortable with that. We think that's a good suggestion. And I emphasize what you said, which is this is not an effort by the applicant to add more dwelling units. It's an effort to solve a problem. And if they thought they could rent the dwelling units without doing this, they would have. But the evidence that you have in the packet before you is it simply creates too much strife in the apartment project not to have enough parking. And that's why Hans held the units off the market. You can't lease units to people and then have them fight over parking. That's just not the right thing to do. So we're trying to solve a problem. Commissioner Poole, you asked a couple of good questions about your Goal 10 obligations to DLCD and Metro, and I think David did a good job of answering them, but if I could, I'll go back. As Joy said, DLCD and Metro received notice 35 days before this hearing. None of them have commented. My experience, and I've been doing this longer than I care to admit, my experience is if they don't comment at this stage of the proceedings, they're either not interested or they find everything's fine. But the fact is, if they haven't participated in this hearing now, Commissioner Poole, they're not going to participate at all. That's just the way DLCD and Metro work. And without belaboring the point, I think David got the analysis right. Goal 10, which is the housing goal, it looks at your residential obligation. And so as Joy said, and I think this was at staff report page 6 as well, the acknowledged housing needs analysis from 1979 shows a deficit for this area. So even if you didn't rely upon the unacknowledged 2019 housing needs analysis, you're still compliant with the city's acknowledged housing needs analysis if you recommend approval and if the city council adopts this amendment. So in terms of complying with the state planning goals, my opinion is you're fine, and I think Joy and David said that in their own ways as well. So let me, Chair Milch, I hope to take less than 15 minutes. I'll go as quickly as I can because I know you've been at it a long time tonight. So let me start with this, and I think I've already described the purpose of the application. It's essentially to solve a problem that was unanticipated by the applicant. We don't have enough parking. The church is willing to sell us a portion of the building, the undeveloped lot behind their church building to add to parking. The only way you can get to this area is through the apartment project. So you're not going to be coming through single family dwellings to reach it. And this area only abuts 2 single family dwellings. Most of the single family dwellings are located to the north, and there's an area of the church that remains in church ownership that acts as an additional buffer to this area if the commission believes that a buffer is needed. So the area we're proposing to add, the 1.04 acres, only abuts 2 single family lots on the west. Church land remains on the north. And we do agree with special condition of approval 3 with the exception. We're not requesting any variances, but we agree with the staff recommendation for special condition of approval 3 that there be an exception to the height so you can put an additional buffering on top of the retaining wall. We think that makes sense and we're happy to do it. And I should add, and I'll tell you in a moment, we look carefully at all the conditions. They're feasible, we can achieve them, and we think they're reasonable.
May I ask you a question about that one? On the
Speak
west,
up, please.
yeah. So
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about that? About special condition 3, specifically the
Yes.
residences on the west side. I noticed that you're removing the larger trees along that boundary. Would they not provide a taller screening if you kept them in place?
That's a good question. Chair Milch, could I ask either Mr. Sanders or Mr. Tygeson to raise their hand? And I think Commissioner Malachi, they can do a better job of answering that than I. And Commissioner Milch, when they finish, I'll finish my presentation.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you.
Tygeson, you are unmuted. You may address that question.
We are retaining around this developed area a buffer zone. And so the trees that are around the property boundary we're looking to stay, and we're removing the trees that are in the center of the project. So,
Hans,
there's a landscape area. I don't believe we're removing any significant trees down in that buffer area to the west.
Hans, just to be clear, Commissioner Malachi was asking, correct us if we're wrong, Commissioner Malachi, about the trees and what would be the northwest corner. Hans, you're saying they'll remain?
The southwest
Southwest.
along those
Okay.
residences.
Thank you.
The proposed future development plan slide shows 3 trees there, whereas the photo shows a solid buffer. I'm just trying to clarify what the plan is there.
Hans,
Can we go back to that buffer photo? Can we go back to the aerial?
slide.
Yeah. You know, our proposal on that is to have that landscape buffer as just kind of a buffer between us and the neighbors.
But what about the trees that are in there?
Those trees, you know, they're going to be part of that landscape area.
Okay.
I don't. We did plant here. We met with the neighbors and we did plant a row of arborvitae. The neighbors had some concerns. And so since we met with the neighbors that abutted this property, we planted a row of arborvitae that met their concerns. At least the neighbor directly to the west, the one neighbor's concerns. And then when we met with the other neighbors, they said they really appreciated that we had met their concerns by providing those plantings as a buffer. You know, the plan is this area where it says tax lot 701. Well, that's, you know, we're planning on that being a green space for, you know, just an open space for families to use and residents, and to create a buffer between that and the properties to the west. This property with the flag lot, we met with that resident and they had concerns, and they met on site and we planted a row of arborvitae after we met with them, which are on, you know, they're there. If you visited the property here over the last few weeks, you would have seen, and that met that neighbor's concerns about buffering.
So the 3 trees listed on tax lot 701. So that's actually an entire row, right, of trees, not just 3 trees.
That should be 3 trees on that tax lot. That's different from the trees that were planted. Those trees were there, and they've been there for, you know, since we bought the property. And so we planted a row of trees that are, if I can, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but we planted a row of trees right down here.
Well,
that
wouldn't they
block
be
the lights.
Wouldn't they be on the aerial
neighborhood?
Hans, wouldn't they be on the aerial photograph?
Yeah, there's a lot of brush and overgrown that area. So the significant trees should be all tagged on this map, because we had a survey, and so any significant trees should be right there. So, but there's also a lot of brush and overgrown down in that west corner.
I understand. Thank you.
Little poison oak in there.
It's Gladstone.
Chair Milch, should I go on?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So the next thing I wanted to say is Hans, who you just heard speaking, visited all of the neighbors, tried to visit all the neighbors abutting the site so we could talk to them personally about the project. Hans submitted a letter dated August 5th that is in your record that explains who we talked with, when, what their comments were. We wanted to make a good outreach to our neighbors to explain why we were doing this and that it did not involve additional apartments. So let me turn to the staff report and the conditions and the approval criteria, Chair Milch. First of all, we've read the staff report and the 3 conditions of approval at page 4. As I said, all the 3 conditions are feasible. We can achieve them. We agree with them. The reason we suggested in the application that there be an express condition prohibiting dwelling units is to be clear to the public and this body that the purpose was to provide additional parking and accessory use and an open space area rather than an opportunity for additional dwelling units. I think, Chair Milch, your addition, if the commission chooses to recommend approval and adopt the special conditions, Your addition of the word expressly to special condition of approval 1 makes sense, and the applicant agrees with that. I think that does both things. It achieves what your planner said she was trying to achieve with the condition, and achieves what the applicant was trying to achieve as well. A couple of other things, as I said already, a March 19, 2020 traffic report by Lancaster Mobley shows that because we're not adding dwelling units, we're not having any traffic impacts. If you went back and looked at the 2015 decision approving the apartments, there was an express finding that traffic wouldn't adversely affect the area for, as well. So you've made that finding in 2015, you can make the same finding tonight. There are also no adverse comments from city departments or the fire department. Pat Sissel submitted a comment saying there was adequate facilities. Fire department didn't have any adverse comments, and your consulting engineering firm commented on public utilities and said they were adequate. So the staff report also analyzed all the approval criteria, and Joy did a nice job going through the criteria in your code as well as the statewide planning goals. She concluded, and we agree, that the evidence we gave you satisfies her findings that the criteria are met. And I want to go back to a point Joy made and I've made before, but it's worth noting. Again, the only reason that Hans has submitted this application is to solve a problem. We don't want more units. We're comfortable with the conditions. We'll work with buffering as suggested in special conditions 2 and 3 with respect to the fence and lighting to provide more of a buffer. But you're going to have an open space area on the west adjacent to the single family lots, and on the east, that's where you've got the storage units and the parking. And we explained some of the additional evidence about why the 15 apartment units had to be held off the market because of inadequate parking. That was not only explained in the application, it was also explained in the applicant's June 25th, 2020 letter responding to the incompleteness determination. So we made a couple of attempts in addition in the narrative to explain what the issue was, why the issue had arisen, and how we're solving it. So because of all that, we think that the Planning Commission can find, as the staff has recommended, that the approval criteria are satisfied and recommend approval of this application to the City Council. Please ask us questions. In addition to Hans, Jessica is available to talk about traffic, Bob Sanders is available, and I'm available. But again, this is simply an applicant trying to solve a problem, and the only way you're going to do it is to take this land and put it into the MR zone. And I should say, and Joy or Tammy, thank you for sending me the letter that was received today. Your code doesn't allow us to have, there's two issues here. We have to be in the same zone and we have to be on the same property. If we could just buy the property and put accessory uses on it without changing the zone, we would do it. It would certainly be easier, but your code doesn't allow that. And that's why this comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendment is necessary to achieve the solution of the problem. So Chair Milch, thank you for your time. And again, if you have questions of any of us, please ask them before you close the record.
I do want to get a little more information just in the record here because I indicated earlier in declaring ex parte communication that I went back and listened to the recording of the original land use approval for this property. The reason that there are 122 units in this development is that it consists of, the original land consisted of 4.09 acres. And our code has a minimum density requirement of 30 units per acre. So if you multiply 30 by 4.09, you get 122 required units. And then 122 units times 1.5 is the source of the 183, which turned out to be 184 parking spaces that were made part of the complex. Now, during the hearing, Hans Tygeson, I think you presented it, and you made a comment at one point that the property parked very well. I think those were the terms that you used. I interpreted that to mean that you were able to fit the required number of parking spaces and the required width of roads for fire access and the required number of apartments on that property adequately. It didn't mean that you could look into the future and know what number of parking spaces would be adequate for the people who chose to reside there, which has turned out to be the problem here. It meets it meets the code requirement. It just didn't turn out to be adequate. And another comment about the history of this property, when the local school district was doing their budgeting for the school year that was going to follow the construction of this building, they estimated that there were going to be about 60 school-aged children living in this complex. And they used that to plan their budget and their staffing for the year. And as it turned out, that first year, there were only 6 children residing in this complex. So it's very hard to predict what the demographics are going to be, whether there are going to be single people who own one car or more than one person who own multiple cars, which turned out to be the case. And the other comment I'd like to make is I want to thank you for providing information that went back a couple of years. This was not a post-pandemic problem that was created when people who maybe got kicked out of another place moved in with a friend, and that this is something that's only been going on since February. You've provided evidence that this has been a situation that you've been living with for a couple of years, and I think it's important that the public realize and put that into context. You know, that's an important part of the factual information. So am I correct in the meaning of your comment about how it parks well? Is that what you meant, that it fit the lot?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to your comments, and I really appreciate you going back and replaying that. You addressed what I was gonna, one of the points I was gonna touch on. So if you're ready for me to kind of talk about that, I got some history that I'd like to share with the members here tonight.
Please do.
So Michael, and help me with your last name. Is it Milch? Yeah. So you brought up a good point, and coming into that land use hearing in 2015, we thought we kind of understood the Gladstone market. We built complexes around the Northwest in quite a number of cities, and we typically build our communities to about 22 to 23 units an acre. And then we usually build our communities at about 50% 2 bedrooms, and then maybe 20% 3s, and the rest is 1s. Because of the high number of the minimum density in Gladstone is 30 units per acre, as you stated, Michael, we had to build this thing at a minimum of 122 units. So we have 60 1-bedrooms and 2 studios. We're over 50% 1s and studios. We've never built a community with that ratio. This property, of course, just looking at the fundamentals of an apartment community, the higher the rents are, the more value it is as an asset, and the more revenue, and the cost difference to build is very little. So we built this with a large number of 1s, thinking that we had parked it adequately. If we probably would have built this in a different community in the Portland Metro, we probably would have been right on in our parking ratios. But Gladstone has a very large number of 2-car families, 2-income earners that need cars to commute. We also thought being on bus lines would help us out. We don't believe we've gotten much relief from being on bus lines. So we underestimated the number of working adults in this community. And it's truly a working class apartment community where the residents need cars to commute. And so when we designed this, we designed it to the very minimum units that we could get on this community. And so that's been a challenge from the start. Our desire is to be a good neighbor, and we quickly learned that we were supporting the police department in the city of Gladstone more than the neighbors, because we were getting ticketed multiple times a day. The police would come in the first few months and issue tickets, and residents weren't happy. We had residents that were having to park down at the Safeway. The churches quickly gated off their communities. And so we had a challenge. We had leased these units, and we had, so we've had to struggle with this. So we also, I believe we probably designed 20 different sites, 20 different layouts that all had a number of multifamily, whether we did townhomes or more of a residential feel to this community. We felt anything that we did there would continue to increase the stress on our apartment community and the neighborhood, even though there's an incredible demand. If we had 300 units in this Gladstone market in this area, we could rent every one of them. So we have a history of turning down residents, and for a long time we had a waiting list, and finally we just stopped taking people because the demand's so high. So we feel like this design, whether it doesn't increase and it's not as profitable for us as a developer, it's the best for the neighborhood. And that, I think, can be seen by the visits to the surrounding neighbors, and they all felt like this design had very little impact. In fact, it reduced the lighting, which was pretty much the #1 comment from the neighbors, was just headlights from cars. And so this design with the garages and the screening, they felt was a good compromise. So we feel like we've taken on we've given a proposal that is the best for the surrounding community, even though there's an incredible demand, and we could rent as many apartments as we could possibly put on the site. Of course, that would just increase the problem of parking. So that's pretty much my comments. We aren't increasing trips, as was stated. One challenge that always comes in an apartment community, even though you don't allow adults to visit, people have family members, that increases your car count, and it's hard to regulate people. The leases say you can't have a guest stay for more than 10 days, but it's quite, we all look at our families, and when people come to visit throughout the year, it causes additional need for parking. And so we think with this proposal, we will more than adequately meet those additional needs for the future.
I'd like to make a quick comment here.
Malachi, go ahead.
Yeah, so Hans, as you probably noticed both tonight and 5 years ago, those of us on Planning Commission talk about parking all the time. So I just want to say I really appreciate the amount of information you provided about what's been happening there. I think it's really helpful for us to see what's actually happening, as opposed to what we just feel is happening in the neighborhoods. And so I just want to say I really appreciate you compiling all of that data for us.
All right, are there any other questions from planning commissioners before we move to public testimony in favor of the proposal? Do we have members of the public here who intend to speak in favor of this proposal? Tammy, do you have any indication that there are people present in that category?
Chair Milch, Mindy Garlington would like to speak.
Okay. All right, Mindy, go ahead. I recognize Mindy Garlington.
Hi, Mindy Garlington here. I live down off of Oatfield Road. So I would just like to, first of all, say that I'm pretty sure that this is one of the big things that I brought up when this thing was built. I said, how can you put in a 3-bedroom apartment and only give them 1 parking spot? It just wasn't going to work. So there you go with that. A couple of the other things that I'd like to bring up is the fact that I don't think that when you concrete that much open space, I understand that they're going to run it into their other existing water capturing system, but it doesn't look like anybody actually went to any of the neighbors and said, is this working for you? All of this concrete. Nothing in here said that they went and actually talked to a neighbor. And I understand they went to Public Works, but that's not really Public Works' problem. That's a neighbor if all of a sudden they now have a stream that's running down into their yard. So that's really, I think, good neighbor. The lighting, when they say they're going to minimize the lighting, well, I understand that they want to minimize the lighting for the neighbors, but what about the people that have to park back there and then walk all the way forward at night in the dark? Is there a way that you can use motion lights? That was my thought. If you've only rented four units of garages, what's the need for more of those units? And that leads me into my next question. You're talking about garage units, covered units, and I didn't remember if there was open units or not. So are all of those units going to be rented, or is this going to be open parking? Is the covered parking going to be open in order to lessen that need? Because clearly that's the problem. Everybody's already got one spot. It's that second spot they need. So if they have to pay for a second spot, I'm just not seeing that problem. Okay, and then is there a tax base increase with this change? I'm asking that of the city, and what is it? Would we collect more from a house versus a bunch of garages? I think that's about it, but this does lead it to the city council. So if I have anything more to say, I'll say it at that time. Thank you. Bye. Am I under 3 minutes?
I think so.
Okay.
I think Tammy would have called you on it if you weren't.
Okay.
Joy, let me have you address, I know as we said, this is kind of a two-part process. One is just the approval of whether or not we change the zoning with the conditions. But subsequent to that would be the actual application for example, installing the parking. And that would address that part of the process is what many of Mindy's questions related to. Should we be addressing those questions tonight, or is that something that's more appropriately dealt with in the future?
There's actually three, isn't there? There's this, then a lot line change, and then the parking.
Correct.
Okay, but one of my questions was, would the city collect more money on homes as opposed to garages in taxes?
And part of the answer to that is money collected on homes would only be collected if homes were actually developed on the R7.2.
When there's a way, there's a will. When there's a will, there's a way, whichever way you want to say it.
Okay. All right. Joy, do you want to give a professional opinion on that?
I do not work for the tax assessment department, and I am not sure what the taxes collected would be one way or the other.
Could I ask a question possibly of the attorney, Mr. David? Is this really a criteria that we can consider in this decision? It seems like we're getting more and more involved in the financial aspects, which I'm just a little confused about how far we go with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, generally, no, you wouldn't be looking at the direct or even indirect financial impact of a given change like this. The city's standards talk about, a public need for the change, and there's certainly, like there is for virtually all of these types of standards in local codes, a certain amount of elasticity to what that standard is. But by and large, the general approach when you're considering a change to the comp plan and a zoning code is to be thinking about it in terms of development issues and whether, broadly speaking, a change from one plan designation and one zone to the other meets that public need. And so I normally wouldn't be thinking of it in terms of tax revenue.
But David, would I be correct in assuming that because this land is currently owned by a church, even though it does not contain a house of worship on it, it is exempt from property tax? Mr. Robinson,
yeah,
do you know,
generally that would be
case?
Generally a church would be a tax exempt entity, and I would assume that all of the property that they would own would also be tax exempt, although, if they're putting some portion of it, not that they are here, but theoretically, if some portion of it we'll be putting to a for-profit use, that might make a difference. But probably in this case, the whole thing is tax exempt, yes, I would guess.
Excuse me, being that it's landlocked, would it prohibit houses being built there?
Not if they were able to obtain an easement from adjacent property owners. So if the church was to provide an easement that met the road design standards of the Public Works Department, then they could gain ingress and egress access for vehicles or public utilities into that part of the property.
Is there room for that? Do you know? For a proper ingress and egress? Don't know.
I do not know. I did not look at the existing parking lot that they have to determine if there were parking spaces that could be eliminated for ingress and egress. I would assume based on aerial images that there would be, if they gave up some of their parking spaces. But that is an assumption. I did not calculate that in comparison to the road design standards.
Okay, I'd like to shift us back to the actual proposed use rather than other theoretical uses of the same piece of property, because that's what we're here to decide on tonight. I know that there were other individuals who sent emails and had questions, and I would like to recognize any of them who may be present. I know we heard from, well, the Preble family, you had a couple of family members, and I think you were going to answer questions or ask questions or give testimony on their behalf. Would you like to be recognized to do that at this time?
We just want some written questions.
Do you repeat that?
You said we just had questions and we sent in written questions.
I can't hear you. You need to speak closer to the microphone. I'm sorry. Was anyone else able to hear that? I thought he said they asked questions, but I didn't know if they wanted to testify.
Can you hear me at all now?
Now I can. Yes. Yes.
Okay. No, we didn't want to testify. We just we were on because we had some questions we sent in written, and we wanted to answer. A few of them already been answered by the testimony so far. So no, we didn't really want to say anything.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad we were able to address them, and it was helpful that Tammy was able to send them to Mr. Robinson as well, so he could look at them and review them. Okay, Joy.
I would like to share those comments on the screen if that would be helpful to make sure that we have addressed any of them that we may not have already.
We want them to be on the record so that they have their appropriate rights if need be in the future.
So I believe these were the questions that Tammy sent out this week. And so these are the questions that were sent to Michael Robinson and to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Chair Milch, my thought would be we could answer these questions in rebuttal if you'd like us to.
That seems appropriate. Let me ask if there anyone else here in the public who would like to address the commission? Hearing none, I believe then at this point I would close do I close the public hearing before we have the rebuttal, or do I wait till the rebuttal is done?
You'd wait until the rebuttal is complete.
Thank you. Okay, so I will let Mr. Robinson rebut any of the questions or issues raised by the public thus far.
Okay. Mike Robinson again on behalf of the record. I want Hans to spend most of our rebuttal time, Chair Milch, talking, but I just have a couple of things to say. Thank you to Ms. Garlington and to the, is it Prebbles? Thank you for waiting almost 3 hours to talk. So we appreciate what you had to say. Hans will take a look at your, I know he's thought about your questions, and as have I, and I think Hans can answer them. But I did, if I could, Chair Milch, want to answer two things that Ms. Garlington asked. She wondered why there were so many 3-bedroom units. There are only 12 3-bedroom units out of 122 units. As Hans said, most of the units are 1 bedroom. And it's, I think he did a nice job of explaining it's just not something he anticipated when they built the project and got the approval in 2015. It's not something they anticipated with respect to how parking would actually play out. And I think you did a nice job of asking that question. And then about the tax base, I agree with your city attorney. It's important, but it's not an approval criterion for this kind of application. But I would say whatever the tax base is now, it's vacant property. So my guess is it's exempt, but it's vacant. You're going to have more tax revenue with some development, which is what Hans is proposing. That's all I have, unless you have specific questions that I can answer. If not, Chair Milch, I think Hans wants to answer the written questions from the Prebbles.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'd first like to answer Mindy's comments. And as Mike, as you said, we do have 12 units of 3 bedrooms. We thought we were going to have this adequately parked. We expected typically 1 bedrooms or typically a single adult working member of the community. Instead, this community has a high number, if not, mostly 2 adults with 2 cars. So that's been a stress, as we've stated before. We have talked to the neighbors that surround this property, and we will be taking and treating all the stormwater. We're reducing that area by close to half of the stormwater that all drains to the south. And now we're going to be taking that stormwater, retaining it and treating it and taking it out to Webster Road to the east. So we are greatly improving the area that drains to the west. And that was a big relief to the neighbor, specifically is Eddie, that lives directly to the west of this property. We'll be meeting all the Portland stormwater requirements, and that will be addressed in the future. I think that was a big concern. Lighting and was another concern. That's why we've provided the screening, and we've put these garages with all the parking on the inside to take in consideration the neighbors. And this will actually block lighting from the apartments, and any lighting for access and walkability after dark will be blocked by these buildings. So we will be taking in consideration the lighting and as far as access. So this will be a safe neighborhood. With carports and things like that. Your point, Mindy, about motion sensor lighting is typically what is used. So that's a very easy problem to solve. So I'm not sure if there's any other questions I missed, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
All right, thank you, Hans. All right, at this point then, it's appropriate to call for a motion to close the public hearing. Do I hear such a motion?
Chair Milch, I've moved that we close the public hearing.
All right, Pat Smith moved. Is there a second?
I second it. Natalie
Malachi-
Smith.
Malachi seconded it too. I'm going to recognize him. I heard his voice first. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Aye.
All right, the public hearing is closed. Now we have an opportunity for the members of the hearing body to make any additional statements or have any additional discussion before we entertain a motion. So
If I may.
would like to be recognized. Les Poole, I see. Would you like to address the issue?
Yes, I think Joyce and many things seems complex because it is, and then parking, certain part of it, as was the housing ratio. It's not paramount for this decision to get a clarification, but I believe it is actually Metro's multifamily overlay that required the minimum number of units. And while our code may reflect that or not, that's just something that we need to be clear about, because this won't affect my decision. But I think there were some limits up there that were conditions that the applicant met in 2015 that he had no choice. And so I really see this, in thinking this through, as a viable plan. I think because of the sensitivity in the past, they've done an exceptional effort of going out of their way to contact us, suggest
Les, you're freezing up and we can't hear you. But I'm getting the impression you're commending the applicant for the efforts that they made to reach out, and the record will reflect that. If your system works better, we'll call.
Garages were all parking, so I see this as a very viable decision. I don't see any reason not to move forward, and I certainly approve of what I'm seeing. And unless someone has some last minute testimony, I'm comfortable to move forward.
All right, thank you, thank you. We were able to hear the end of that very clearly and got the gist of where you are on it. Our other planning commissioners, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I'd actually like to address two aspects.
Yes.
So during the initial application, the applicant actually wanted to provide more green space, but there was no ability to do so due to the limitations we had with density. So I do see that this would allow for that. I want to make sure that if there are any conditions along those lines that would prohibit that, based on what happened last time, that we make sure that that's taken into account, not in this application, but on the future application. On the aspect of whether or not this meets a need, we saw that the residents are parking in neighboring properties, they're parking on Safeway, but more importantly, they're parking on Webster. And that is specifically something that I think we need to improve. We don't want residents parking on Webster Road.
Okay. Other commissioners would like to address this matter?
Yes, I would. Pat Smith. The first planning commission meeting I attended was for a 56-unit complex being built off of Abernathy on a Beatrice Street address. Some of the testimony given there was by property owners on Stone Oaks And I think, without pointing any fingers, it's water under the bridge. But I think any reasonable person that goes to Stone Oaks can realize that this original structure is not a positive influence in our community. It's here, but we have to live with it. I can support a naturally shielded parking lot and nothing beyond that. Maybe garages, anything that can be hidden. Any additional buildings, there's still 2 homes that back up flush against this property, and it's above there. And we're just not doing anything positive for the other citizens in Gladstone that abut this property by allowing anything beyond a parking lot. I can support it with that provision, and beyond that, I can't.
Okay. Anyone else? I do want to say, as I think one of the applicants referenced tonight, after the last hearing, the original hearing for this property, Mindy Garlington was in attendance and raised the issue about whether we have high enough minimum parking requirements for apartment complexes. And the comments that were made at the time, and David Doofman, you were in attendance that night too, the only way you can fit 122 units on a property this size and provide 183 or more parking spaces is to have 3-story buildings. So part of the reason that the buildings are as big as they are is that that's the way you achieve the density with the parking requirements that we have. So I know the Stone Oaks court residents aren't happy with that, but unless we raise our height requirements, we will not be able to provide a higher level of parking and achieve the density requirements the same way. So Mindy raised a great concern. Maybe she was more in touch with the parking needs of this community than our code is. But I'm glad that we have come up with a way that seems to address this. If this property that we're proposing to rezone had been part of the original property, we would have had a 5-acre plot requiring 154 units. And I can't do the math in my head, but 228 parking spaces. And we probably would have been in a similar situation because we still would have had people that needed more than 1 or 1.5 spaces per unit. So this has turned out to be a way that addresses a problem in an effective way. So I will entertain a motion from a member of the commission to adopt the recommendation, and we'll consider perhaps some minor changes in the language. Can we, Joey, can you go back to the conditional recommendation part, and we'll look at that language? Based on comments from Mr. Robinson, would the commissioners be willing to add the word expressly in paragraph 1? Shall be expressly or developed expressly with land uses customarily designed and so on.
Would it be better to use the word exclusively, or?
That was the word I used originally. I was going to go with what the lawyer suggested. But
yeah, no, I think exclusively is what I would go with. That's what we talk. It's a slight distinction. I think exclusively is the word to use.
Okay, all right. I will take our own city attorney's advice on that. And where would you stick it? Where would the word go?
I personally would put it as it's worded now. The easiest thing I think would be to say the 1.04 acres that are to be rezoned shall be developed exclusively with land uses customarily considered, etc. So I would put exclusively between developed and with.
All right, very good. I wanted to be sure the grammar was correct too, and I appreciate that input. Are commissioners comfortable with that change?
Yes.
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 Any objection? Okay. So I will go ahead and make the motion myself.
Do we want to discuss the screening per?
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's look at the other aspects of it too. If there's any discussion on the other parts of this.
Pat, did you have a recommended change to screening to accommodate what you were looking for?
I'm sorry, Malachi, was that question directed at me?
Yeah.
I don't have anything specific. I think, as long as it's natural screening, I think some kind of a barrier wouldn't be, but shrubs of some type, trees, kind of a natural barrier would soften that a lot. But I could live with anything as long as it doesn't infringe on the people right next door to it.
And I would add that common sense dictates that something stay green and not something that's going to lose all its leaves every year. It's a common sense thing that you're trying to screen it, year round.
And I think those specifics would be addressed
Sure.
later in the design review.
Yes.
So with the change, are we comfortable then with the special conditions as listed here?
Well, let's be clear then. Are we saying that there is a condition that they have to use a fence, or that there's a condition that you have to use natural screening?
We've not changed the wording. So right
Do
now
we
it's
give them
describing
the
fence.
option?
So do you want to reword item number 3 or special condition 3 to say the applicant shall install a 6-foot landscaping screen if the integrity of the retaining wall can be maintained? If the integrity cannot be maintained or retained, do you want them to install a 6-foot fence that would not be living material but would be a fence? Because plant roots and water can.
That come up for design review?
They would, but this is a special condition that goes with the land. And so this is important to consider the wording specifically. And it does come up with design review, but these special conditions would have to be recorded, and they would go with the land.
Well,
They
wouldn't
don't
we-
necessarily go with the application that is being proposed.
To be clear, they would stick with the land even if it was resold.
Yes.
Okay, so the language right now mentions a fence first and gives the option of a landscaping screen at the end. Do we want to keep it in that order?
Yeah, that was my recommendation, that we reverse the order and make it clear that if a landscaping barrier is found to be unfeasible, or can't be approved, or then a fence, a 6-foot fence, shall be installed in lieu of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can live with that. I think that's fine.
Okay, so the wording would be more along the lines of to provide screening, a 6-foot landscaping screen shall be installed. And if it's not possible for that to be maintained, then we would permit a fence.
If it's found unfeasible is what I would.
Okay.
How I would word it.
Should we draft all that language specifically to make sure that it's
Chair Milch, I think that's largely your call if you want to get that specific tonight. I will say, particularly because it's a recommendation, the record is quite clear about, I think, what you're intending. And so if the commission preferred, you could say we would recommend approval to the city council based on the special conditions and then subject to the changes that we made during our deliberation. Something along those lines would be just fine.
okay. I don't want to spend a lot of time wordsmithing here tonight. I like that approach. Okay. I'm going to make the motion myself that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council the proposed change of zoning from the specified property from R 7.2 to MR with the 3 special conditions as discussed in the planning meeting.
On file.
Is that specific enough?
C0-20-DCP.
Okay, I didn't have that in front of me, but that's the one. Yeah, we'll make sure that we have reference to the specific thing.
That's fine. And so if I could be maybe a little too lawyerly about it, let's treat that as your call for a motion. So somebody could say so moved if they want to make that motion.
Okay, that's my call for motion. Would a commission member like to make the motion?
Commissioner Smith so moves.
All right, Commissioner Smith, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, I heard a motion from Commissioner Smith and a second, I believe, from Commissioner Poole.
Correct.
Any further discussion? All right, Tammy, if you'll take the roll. Do we have a roll call vote, Tammy?
Commissioner Langston,
Yes.
Commissioner Natalie Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Malachi,
Yes.
Commissioner Poole,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Commissioner Pat Smith,
Yes.
Chair Milch.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously. Joy, I will trust you to listen to the record and get the wording worked out as we pass it along to the City Council. Thank you, commissioners, for your work on this issue. Thank you, applicant and representatives and members of the public for testifying tonight and helping us to resolve this problem and to it helps inform us a little bit more. You know, we talked about parking in our earlier agenda matter. The more we learn about the nature of, you know, the way property is used in Gladstone, the more that informs how we address transportation and parking issues at large in the future. So this has been a good thing for us in a lot of ways. Thank you very much. I will dismiss the people who were part of this hearing if they'd like to head home. All right, that concludes our regular agenda. We will go now to, Tammy, were there any other members of the public that wanted to address us on any other matters that weren't part of our agenda items?
I did not receive any notification or requests.
Okay. All right, we will ask for business from the planning commissioners, and I'm going to go in reverse order tonight. So I will start at the opposite end of the non-existent table.
Yes.
Pat Smith, just to begin.
No, I'm talked out. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Williams?
I've spoke my piece. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Poole?
Yes, I believe we need to have a future discussion on parking.
Yes.
My comments for this evening.
That's
Thank you.
very, that's very clear. Yes, and I think we have a lot of studies and things done in the past that can inform us on that, and we'll look at that in the future. But I agree. Malachi, Commissioner Malachi.
Yeah, two things. So one, I feel like a lot of our discussions around parking and plans around parking are based on Metro and DLCD, which makes sense. But I think some of the things like tonight should definitely be included in those discussions moving forward. And also I went ahead and picked up the book that I mentioned in that climate change report that we did the other day. So I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but I have it. So I'll start trying to look into that.
All right. It's always good that when commissioners read and keep informed about the issues that come before us. Commissioner Natalie Smith.
I have nothing further this evening.
All right. And Commissioner Langston.
No business from me tonight. Thank you.
Okay. And I think we've, you know, I'm pleased that we've addressed the things we did. I don't have any other matters for us. Councilor Mercero, you are here observing tonight. Do you have any comments for us?
I had to get my mute button fixed. I think that the commission as a whole and you did a good job tonight. I was very happy with what I heard.
Well, thank you. You know, we can only do as good a job as the staff prepares us to do. And again, I want to commend David and Joy for the work that you do with applicants to make sure that we are well informed and that issues that people come, you know, are dealt with in advance. So I'm grateful to the two of you for the role you play in our work. So with that, I think I will.
Before you stop,
yes.
Joy, do you have anything to say about next week's meeting?
I am not part of next week's meeting.
Okay.
There will be an agenda and information sent out tomorrow.
Okay.
I will be on vacation, so I will not be attending next week's meeting.
Very good.
Has that been authorized? Has the commission authorized the vacation? Just checking.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second that.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. I don't know by whom, but I'm going to accept it. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned at 9:51 p.m. Thank you all for coming tonight.